Hey guys, welcome back. First off, this is not a sponsored review. I purchased all of these products with my own cash money, so hopefully that buys me some shred of credibility. And second of all, this is also a collaboration with WJ Handydad. He also purchased this Motive Products Power Bleeder, so I recommend you stop watching this video and head over to his channel, because he also bought additional adapters to use on his Chevy Avalanche and Dodge Charger. So he's going to have a lot more feedback on this product, and I have a feeling he's also going to show you how to actually use it. So in this video I'd like to share what I learned using this power bleeder, and then I also want to talk about the fluid that I removed out of my 2004 Crown Vic and my 2010 Mercury Grand Marquis. So what can I say about flushing brake fluid? This is one of those things that if you ask two people, you might get three different answers. And what I mean by that is one guy could say you need to change it every so often, every couple of years, and another guy can say my car is 20 years old, I've never changed it once, it's on the original fluid and the car drives and stops just fine. And based on my experience, I would have to say both of them are correct. And what I mean by that is it all comes down to application. How the car is driven, how the car is operated, the type of terrain, hills and mountains, and also what type of climate and region of the country that they're operating the car in. Whether it be a rainy and wet climate or in the salt belt, or if they live in a very dry desert climate with very little humidity. So before I came out here, I wanted to get a little bit more information, so I reviewed all 300 pages of my owner's manual for my '04 Vic and my 2010 Grand Marquis, and the only thing I could find was one small paragraph, and I'll read that to you. And then I also went through my scheduled maintenance guide for both cars, and this is that little book that tells you what you should inspect and replace every 5,000 miles. So this is a pretty good reference material. And in this entire book, I didn't find one single word about brake fluid and a service interval. So based on this book, there is no manufacturer recommendation to service the brake fluid by flushing it or bleeding it. So I found that was interesting. So this is the paragraph I found in the owner's manual, and it says brake fluid reservoir. The fluid level will drop slowly as the brakes wear and will rise when the brake components are replaced. Fluid levels below the max line that do not trigger the brake system warning lamp are within the normal operating range. There is no need to add fluid. If the fluid levels are outside of the normal operating range, the performance of your brake system could be compromised. Seek service from your dealer immediately. Well, that's nice, but it really doesn't help me determine when and if and how to service the brake fluid. But I did find this interesting. Every month I get these coupons from my local Ford dealer, and I like reading through them even though I don't take my car in for service. And I found this. I found this interesting. There's a $20 coupon here on any of these services: transmission flush, coolant flush, and brake fluid flush. So if you've ever taken your car in for an oil change at your Ford dealer, there's a good chance after they do the multi-point inspection they're going to come back and say, hey, you need to change your brake fluid. So I think that's real interesting. That's one of the first things they'll recommend you get done, but according to the owner's manual and the service maintenance guide, there is no manufacturer recommended interval. So I got curious about how much my Ford dealer charges to do that brake flush. So I called around to my 3 local dealerships, and Fairfield Ford charges $270 for a brake flush, Dixon Ford charges $170 for a brake fluid flush, and Woodland Ford is the same at $170. So I guess if I showed up with that coupon, they would change it for $150. So wanting a little bit more information about brake fluid, I went into my online service literature and I found these brake fluid tips for the procedure. And I found 3 tips on here that are interested me. And it says pressure bleeding is recommended for all hydraulic brake disc systems. On models equipped with power brakes, exhaust the vacuum in the power unit by pumping the brake pedal several times with the engine off. And on vehicles equipped with plastic reservoirs, do not exceed 25 psi bleeding pressure. And that's good to know because this Motive product pressure bleeder has a pressure gauge right on it. And in the owner's manual, they say don't exceed 15 psi unless you have a manufacturer's specification. So that's nice to know. So I did a recent community post and I asked you guys for tips on brake fluid flushing, and I got 2 good tips. The first one, I want to give a shout out to Rich from Ford Boss Me, and he said his dealership recommends flushing the brake fluid every 3 years, and then they found out that wasn't good enough, so they changed their recommendation to every 2 years. And his personal recommendation, based on what he's seeing, he recommends doing it every single year, annually. And the second tip I got was from John America, and he recommended using these speed bleeders. And these are the bleeder valves. They're replacement units, but they're pretty neat. They've got a one-way check ball built into it, so when you push the brake pedal, it will of course expel the fluid out of the nipple, but when the fluid flow stops, it automatically pushes the check ball back so air can't be drawn into the system. So it really helps with a one-man band setup when you try to bleed your brakes by yourself. And right now these are going for 15 bucks for a pair, so I guess you'd need 4 of them for your Crown Vic. So when it comes to flushing brake fluid, the very first time I did this was back in 1994, and at that time I used the 2-man method, one person pumping the brake pedal while I'm out there working the wrench. And for the last 20 some odd years, that's the way I've always been doing it on my personally owned vehicles until I had the pleasure of working in industry, and I got to use one of these machines, and this is a professional commercial machine, and this is like the Rolls-Royce of brake fluid flushing machines. It's got a line for all 4 wheels. It's got 2 Motive power sources. It's powered by shop air and an electric motor that actually sucks fluid out of the nipples as it forces it through the master cylinder. So once you get in a routine and you get the car up in the air, you can really flush the brake fluid on all 4 wheels in about 5 minutes, and it's very nice. But of course this is a multi-thousand-dollar machine and only shops can afford it. And I think we're all familiar with this guy. This is the vacuum hand pump, and this thing works great. But it doesn't really work for my application because you still have to keep an eye on the master cylinder to make sure it doesn't get too low, and then you suck in air through the system, and then you've got to start all over again. So that's what brings me to the Motive Products Power Bleeder, and this is it right here. I bought this one for $62, and it came with the plastic adapter cap, and it's part number 0107. And after using it, I don't really recommend it. I recommend getting the one made of metal, part number 0117, and it's a little bit more at $73. And the reason why I didn't buy this one is because when I put it in my cart, it said it wouldn't be delivered for 3 weeks. So I was so excited about trying this out, I just bought the plastic one. So basically how this thing works is it's got a 2-quart capacity. You fill it up with brake fluid, and then you attach this cap to the master cylinder. You pump it up to 15 psi, and it will force fresh, clean brake fluid through your system. And so all you've got to do is you've got to go to each wheel and crack the bleeder valve and watch the fluid go from dirty to clean, and then tighten the valve back up. And it's really a pleasure to use. It really takes the stress out of keeping an eye on the master cylinder from dropping too low and sucking in air. It really is an almost set it and forget it procedure for the DIY guy at home. So let me give you some optional tips. The first thing I did is I like to suck brake fluid out of the dirty brake fluid out of the master cylinder. And so I got this Turkey Baster at Walmart for $2, and I did a little modification here. I shoved a piece of vinyl tubing up the tip here, and it really lets me get into the master cylinder into the last corner. And with this thing I was able to remove 99% of the fluid out of the master instead of pushing that dirty fluid through the system. And another optional tip is when I get the car up in the air and the wheels off, I like to take my favorite penetrating fluid and put a single drop on each of the bleeder valves and let that soak in while I'm removing fluid out of the master cylinder. And then I like to come back. I saw this tip on One Road Jimmy where he takes grease and he greases the fittings to prevent air being sucked in through the threads. And I thought I would give that a try. So the only thing I had was dielectric grease, and it kind of worked and it kind of didn't. And the next time I do this, I don't think I'm going to use this. I'm going to get actual bearing grease or some red and tacky, something very thick. This kind of thinned out over time. And another optional tip is the very first time I crack my bleeder valve, I like to use a 6-point socket because I'm terrified of rounding it off. So the very first time I break it with a 6-point, and then when I just need to manipulate it, I'll go to my 12-point box end wrench or my open end wrench. And I know you're not supposed to do this. You're supposed to use a flare nut wrench, but I don't have one. So that's why I break it the first time with that 6-point to try to prevent rounding that nut off. So, okay, so that's it for my optional tips. Okay, so now let me talk about the fluid that I took out. So the very first car that I did was my Crown Vic. And you can see I've got quite a different few colors of fluid out of these cars, and I want to explain that. So the last time I flushed my brake fluid on both of my cars was 3 years ago, or 2 years and 10 months ago. And I'd like to pat myself on the back for keeping such good records, because it really helps me figure out what I did and what not. So the last time I did this was December 24th, 2018, and my Crown Vic had 160,416 miles. And I just did this a few days ago at 162,080. So on this fluid, and by the way, this is clean fluid right here. That's why it's so clear. So these bottles on the left are my Crown Vic, and the bottles on the right are from the Grand Marquis. So all of this fluid, and I did the Grand Marquis at the same time, the same day, and the Grand Marquis had 68,350 miles, and again I just did this a few days ago, and now it's got 83,010 miles. So what I'm trying to establish is that both of these fluids have the same amount of time. All of this fluid is 3 years old, But on my Crown Vic, it has 1,664 miles on the fluid, and on my Grand Marquis it has 14,1660 miles. So that's quite a bit of difference, you know, 15,000 average versus 1,500. And you can see that I'm only driving the Vic for the past 3 years about 500 miles a year, and on the Grand Marquis I'm averaging 5,000 miles a year. So the first thing I'd like to show you is this is the fluid that I took out of the master cylinder of my my Vic, and you can see it's got a green color to it. And I thought that maybe I used 2 different types of fluid, and no, I didn't. I actually dug out my receipt, and this is what I put in 3 years ago. I used the Prestone .3. So both of these fluids are the same, identical, but they've changed to different colors, and I don't know why. Maybe the Crown Vic has different lines than the Grand Marquis or whatever. And then the very first wheel that I bled was the right rear, and you can see it's a lighter shade of green, and the reason why is because when I was removing this, when it got to about right here, that's when it started pumping out clean fluid. But I was so impressed with how this thing was working, and I was in such an awe, I just let it go and go and go. I just got distracted because I was just enjoying that feeling of not having to keep an eye on the master cylinder. And then the next wheel I did was the left rear, and that's about how much I took out until it started coming out clean. And one thing I do want to note is that when you're using this power bleeder, the rear wheels bleed very slow compared to the front wheels, and that's just because the run of the lines is that much longer, and the pressure, it takes more pressure to get to the rear wheels. And then once I got to the front, that's how much it came out until it went clean. And then when I got to the last one, the left front, you know, it almost immediately came clean just after a little bit, and so that's why it's so light colored. And then the next car that I did was my my Grand Marquis, and this is what I took out. This is what I sucked out of the master cylinder with the Turkey Baster, and it's got a very contaminated appearance. And when I stuck my flashlight down in the master cylinder to look at it, it looked perfectly fine. But I tell you what, when I pulled it, when I was sucking it out with the Turkey Baster, I could see just how contaminated the fluid was. And to give you an over-exaggerated example, it looked like Italian salad dressing before you shake it up. You know, it'll have the olive oil and the vinegar, and you can distinctly see all the different textures of fluids. And that's kind of what this looks like. You can see that there's 2 different fluids in there. And so what I'm assuming that is one is brake fluid and one is water that is being drawn in by the moisture of in the humidity. And so I drained the master cylinder, and when I drained it, I noticed that the master cylinder had this black dirt and sediment in the bottom of the cylinder. So I decided to fill it up with clean fluid, and then I sucked it out again, and I'll try to get this on camera. But I actually sucked out the sediment. I got the sediment to suspend in the new fluid, and I was able to suck it out. And so that's that black ring you can see on the bottom of the fluid here. So that's why I have 2 bottles of master cylinder fluid. I had to flush the master cylinder twice to get it clean. And then this right here is what I took out of the right rear wheel. You know, it's got this weird orange amber color, and then you can pretty much see the rest here. You know, this is a lighter orange, and then I think that's because I let it go too much, and there's more clean fluid in this one, and then it goes back to dark, and then I let it, since I had extra fluid left over in the reservoir, I just let it go. So that's why that one looks so clean. Excuse me. So after using this Motive Products power bleeder, I really like it. For the first time in my life, bleeding and flushing brakes on my personally owned vehicles has never been simpler. It's such a pleasure to use. Okay, so now let me talk about some cleanup and storage tips. So the owner's manual for the power bleeder, it says to use denatured alcohol to clean it out. And so I went down to Walmart and I found two things. They were out of stock on the denatured alcohol, so I pulled up my phone and I found it at Ace Hardware for 10 bucks. And I ended up buying isopropyl alcohol for $2.78 for a quart, because I just felt paying $10 a quart for this denatured alcohol was just too expensive. So I got home and I did some research, and I wanted to know what the difference is between denatured and isopropyl. And I found this denatured contains specific additives to make it poisonous for human consumption, and isopropyl is considered non-toxic and does not contain any particular poisons. So I think I'm okay using the isopropyl, and hopefully I didn't ruin anything. And the owner's manual says to replace the hose on here every 4 years, and I think I'm going to replace the hose right now because because I'm only using this on my Fords, I really don't need this brass fitting, and I would prefer to have just a one-piece hose so that I can remove it and clean it, because the clamps on here are permanent, and I would really prefer to remove this hose so I can clean out the hose properly to get it cleaned out, because the next time I'm going to use this is either a year or 2 years from now. Alright, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.